The July sun blazed mercilessly over the Dakota Territory in 1876, casting long shadows across the prairie where the forces faced each other. Across 100 yards of dusty ground, on one side, 27 cavalry soldiers of the 7th Regiment sat tensely on their horses, rifles at the ready, sweat beading beneath their blue wool uniforms despite the early morning hour. On the other side, 43 Lakota warriors stood or sat on their painted ponies, their faces painted for war, weapons gleaming in the harsh light. Subscribe to our channel for more incredible tales from the Old West that will challenge everything you think you know about the frontier. Captain James Morrison, a 34-year-old career soldier from Ohio, gripped his service revolver while studying the imposing figure of Chief Standing Bear. Across the no-man's land that separated the two groups, Morrison had been in the Army for 12 years, had fought in the Civil War, and had participated in numerous skirmishes with Native American tribes. But something about this confrontation felt different, more significant than a simple military engagement. The standoff had begun 3 days earlier when Morrison's patrol had encountered the Lakota band traveling across what the U.S. government claimed was federal territory. According to Morrison's orders, any Native Americans found off their designated reservations were to be arrested and returned immediately. But Chief Standing Bear had refused to comply, claiming they were traveling to sacred burial grounds to honor their ancestors. Chief Standing Bear, Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the tense silence, "You and your people must return to the reservation immediately. These are direct orders from the territorial government." Standing Bear, a man of perhaps 50 years with silver streaking his long black hair, remained motionless on his horse. When he spoke, his English was clear and precise, learned during years of forced negotiations with white officials. "Captain Morrison, my people have traveled this path for generations beyond counting. Our fathers and their fathers are buried in the sacred hills ahead. We harm no one, take nothing that is not ours. Why must we be prisoners on land that was stolen from us?" Morrison felt the familiar conflict that had been growing within him during his years of frontier service. His orders were clear, but the logic of those orders became increasingly difficult to justify when faced with the quiet dignity of men like Standing Bear. "Chief, I don't make the policies. I just follow orders. If you don't comply, I'll be forced to use whatever means necessary to ensure compliance." The words tasted like ash in Morrison's mouth. He had seen what whatever means necessary looked like, and the memory of previous encounters haunted his dreams. Behind Standing Bear, Morrison could see women and children among the warriors, including an elderly woman who appeared to be ill. Several of the children looked malnourished, and he realized this wasn't a war party at all, but a desperate group trying to reach a sacred place before losing an elder. Sergeant Patrick O'Brien, Morrison's Irish second-in-command, nudged his horse closer to his captain. "Sir, what are your orders? The men are getting nervous." Morrison looked at his soldiers, young men mostly, some barely out of their teens. They had been trained to follow orders without question, but he could see uncertainty in their eyes. They, too, could see that they were facing families, not enemy combatants. "Hold position, Sergeant. No one fires unless I give the direct order." As the morning stretched on, the heat intensified, and both sides began to show signs of fatigue. Horses stamped and snorted, children cried softly, and the tension seemed to thicken with each passing minute. It was then that Morrison noticed something that would change everything. One of the Lakota children, a boy of perhaps 8 years old, had separated himself from the group and was walking slowly toward the soldiers. In his small hands, he carried a wooden cup filled with water. "Jesus, Mary, and Joseph," whispered O'Brien. "What's the lad doing?" Morrison watched in amazement as the boy continued walking, showing no fear despite being surrounded by armed soldiers. When he reached Morrison's horse, the child looked up and offered the cup of water. "For you," the boy said in halting English. "Water, hot day." Morrison stared down at the child, seeing in his young face innocence that transcended the racial and cultural barriers that had created this standoff. Slowly, Morrison dismounted and knelt to accept the water from the boy's hands. "Thank you." Morrison said quietly, taking a sip of the warm but clean water. "What's your name, son?" "I am called Little Fox," the boy replied. "Grandfather says, warriors honor each other, even when they fight." Morrison felt something crack inside his chest, a wall he had built through years of following orders that often made no moral sense. He handed the cup back to Little Fox and watched as the boy walked calmly back to his people. Don't miss what happens when humanity breaks through the barriers of war. Subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell to see how this incredible story unfolds. Chief Standing Bear had observed the exchange, and Morrison could see something like approval in the older man's eyes. It was then that the chief made a decision that surprised everyone present. "Captain Morrison," Standing Bear called out, "I would speak with you alone." In the space between us, Morrison's men immediately protested. "Sir, it could be a trap," warned O'Brien. But Morrison found himself trusting the man who had raised a child capable of such a generous gesture. "I'm going to talk to him," Morrison announced. "If something happens to me, escort the tribe back toward the reservation, but use no violence unless they attack first." Morrison walked slowly into the space between the two forces, and Standing Bear dismounted to meet him halfway. The two men stood facing each other, representatives of cultures that had been in conflict for decades. "You have kind eyes," Standing Bear said without preamble. "Different from other soldiers I have known. You have a good boy there," Morrison replied, nodding toward Little Fox. "Takes courage to offer water to armed strangers." Standing Bear smiled slightly. "He is my grandson. His parents died last winter from the white man's diseases. He has seen much death for one so young, but he chooses kindness over hatred." Morrison felt the weight of that statement. How many Native American children had lost parents to diseases brought by European settlers? How many had every reason to hate men like him? "Chief, I have orders to take you back to the reservation, but I need you to help me understand something. Why is this journey so important that you're willing to risk a fight?" Standing Bear gestured toward the elderly woman Morrison had noticed earlier. "That is my sister, Singing Dove. She is dying. Her last wish is to be buried next to her husband and children, who rest in the sacred burial ground ahead. In my culture, to deny a dying person their final wish brings great spiritual consequences." Morrison looked at the frail woman, seeing in her the same dignity he had observed in her brother. "How long does she have?" "Perhaps days, perhaps hours. She grows weaker with each sunset." Morrison found himself in an impossible position. His orders were clear, but the human cost of enforcing them was becoming unbearable. As he stood in the Dakota heat, facing a man whose only crime was wanting to honor his dying sister's wishes, Morrison realized that some orders were not worth following. "Chief Standing Bear, I'm going to make you a proposition." The chief waited silently for Morrison to continue. "I'll escort you to the burial ground myself, my men, and I will ensure your safe passage there and back. In return, you give me your word that you'll return to the reservation peacefully once your sister has been properly honored." Standing Bear studied Morrison's face for a long moment. "And your superiors, what will you tell them?" Morrison smiled grimly. "I'll tell them the truth, that I encountered a family trying to bury their dead with dignity, and that I chose to act like a human being instead of just a soldier." The chief extended his hand, and Morrison grasped it firmly. "Captain Morrison, you are a man of honor. My people will remember this." As they walked back toward their respective groups, Morrison knew he was probably ending his military career, but for the first time in years, he felt like he was doing something that would let him sleep peacefully. At night, the announcement of the agreement caused different reactions from both sides. Some of Morrison's soldiers looked relieved, while others appeared confused or even angry. Among the Lakota, there was cautious hope mixed with surprise that a white soldier would show such unexpected compassion. "Sir," Sergeant O'Brien said quietly, "the men are with you, whatever you decide. We've all seen enough senseless killing." Morrison nodded gratefully. "Form up, Sergeant. We're going to escort these people on a mission of mercy." As the combined group began moving toward the sacred burial ground, Morrison rode beside Chief Standing Bear, beginning a conversation that would challenge everything both men thought they knew about their supposed enemies. Little Fox ran between the horses, sometimes riding with his grandfather, sometimes walking beside Morrison's horse, chattering in a mixture of Lakota and English about everything he saw. His presence served as a bridge between the two cultures, reminding everyone that beneath the uniforms and war paint were simply human beings, trying to navigate a complicated world. The journey that had begun as a military confrontation was transforming into something unprecedented, a voluntary alliance between former enemies, united by a common recognition of basic human dignity. Morrison didn't know it yet, but this decision would set in motion events that would change not just his own life, but the relationship between the military and the local tribes for years to come. Sometimes the most important battles are won not through violence, but through the courage to choose compassion over conflict. The journey to the sacred burial ground took 2 days, during which Captain Morrison and his men experienced a side of Lakota culture they had never seen before. Rather than the savage warriors described in military briefings, they encountered a people with rich traditions, complex social structures, and a profound connection to the land that surrounded them. If this story of unexpected friendship across cultural divides is moving you, make sure you're subscribed to our channel for more incredible tales from the frontier. As they traveled, Chief Standing Bear rode beside Morrison, sharing stories of his people's history and their relationship with the land they were crossing. Morrison learned that every hill, every stream, every distinctive rock formation held meaning in Lakota culture, serving as both navigation markers and spiritual touchstones that connected the present generation to their ancestors. You see that outcropping there? Standing Bear pointed to a distinctive red sandstone formation rising from the prairie. My great-grandfather received his vision there as a young man. The spirits told him we're to lead our people during the great drought of his generation. Morrison found himself genuinely interested in these stories, recognizing in them a depth of connection to the land that his own culture seemed to lack. How long have your people lived in this region? Since the beginning of time, according to our creation stories, Standing Bear replied. But if you mean since we came to this particular area, perhaps 100 years. We followed the buffalo herds and the guidance of our spiritual leaders. During rest stops, Morrison watched his soldiers interact with the Lakota families. Despite language barriers and cultural differences, he saw his men sharing water with thirsty children, helping elderly tribal members dismount from their horses, and even attempting to communicate through gestures and broken phrases in each other's languages. Sergeant O'Brien had struck up a particular friendship with a Lakota warrior named Windwalker, who had fought in several battles against white soldiers, but spoke English well enough to serve as an interpreter. The two men discovered they were both fathers of young children and found common ground in their worries about providing for their families in an uncertain world. "Your boy, Little Fox," O'Brien said to Windwalker as they watched the child playing with some of the younger soldiers. "He's got no fear of us at all. His grandfather teaches him that bravery comes from understanding, not from hatred." Windwalker replied, "Standing Bear believes that our peoples must learn to live together, or we will all destroy each other." Morrison overheard this conversation and realized that Chief Standing Bear was not just a tribal leader trying to bury his sister. He was a visionary attempting to find a path toward peace between his people and the encroaching white settlers. On the second night, as they camped within sight of the sacred hills, Singing Dove's condition worsened dramatically. Dr. William Hayes, the regiment's medical officer, examined her and confirmed what everyone already knew. She had very little time left. "Captain," Dr. Hayes reported privately to Morrison, "she has pneumonia, and at her age, there's nothing I can do. She might not live to see the burial ground." Morrison watched as the Lakota families gathered around Singing Dove, singing soft songs and speaking to her in their native language. Despite the language barrier, he could feel the love and respect they held for the dying woman. Little Fox approached Morrison that evening, his usual cheerfulness replaced by the solemn understanding that children sometimes possess about death. "Captain Morrison," the boy said quietly, "Grandmother Singing Dove wants to speak with you." Morrison was surprised by the request, but he followed Little Fox to where the elderly woman lay on a blanket near the fire. Her eyes were bright despite her obvious weakness, and she gestured for him to sit beside her. "Thank you," she whispered in English, her voice barely audible, "for kindness, my brother told me what you did." Morrison felt a lump forming in his throat. It was the right thing to do. "Ma'am," Singing Dove reached into a small pouch beside her and withdrew something that made Morrison's eyes widen in surprise. It was a military button, brass and bearing the insignia of the U.S. Army. "My husband, Blue Eagle, found this many years ago, after battle, where many died. He kept it to remember that white soldiers were also men with families." She pressed the button into Morrison's hand. "Now I give it to soldier who shows my people are also human beings." Morrison stared at the button, realizing it had probably come from the uniform of a soldier killed in battle against Blue Eagles' war party, yet instead of keeping it as a trophy, the Lakota warrior had preserved it as a reminder of their shared humanity. "Mum, I don't know what to say," Morrison managed. "Say, you will remember. That hatred only brings more hatred. Say, you will help our peoples find peace." Morrison nodded, unable to speak past the emotion constricting his throat. The journey is about to reach its most powerful moment. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to witness how this incredible alliance transforms everyone involved. Singing Dove died quietly just before dawn, surrounded by her family and with the sacred hills visible in the distance. Morrison stood with his men at a respectful distance as the Lakota performed their mourning rituals, struck by the dignity and reverence with which they honored their dead. Chief Standing Bear approached Morrison after the initial ceremonies. "Captain, we are very close to the burial ground now, but I want you to know that your presence here, your respect for our customs, has already fulfilled my sister's deepest wish. She died knowing that there are white men who see us as people, not just obstacles to be removed." The final approach to the sacred burial ground was unlike anything Morrison had ever experienced. The site was a natural amphitheater carved into the hills, with ancient burial scaffolds and stone markers indicating graves that stretched back generations. The spiritual power of the place was palpable, even to men from a completely different cultural tradition. "This is where my people have honored their dead for countless generations," Standing Bear explained to Morrison and his men. "Each grave connects us to our ancestors and reminds us of our responsibilities to future generations." As the Lakota prepared Singing Dove's body for burial according to their traditions, Morrison noticed that several of his soldiers had removed their hats in a gesture of respect. These were the same men who, just days earlier, had been prepared to rest or even fight these people. The burial ceremony itself was beautiful and moving, combining ancient songs, ritual offerings, and speeches that honored Singing Dove's life and contributions to her people. Morrison found himself deeply moved by the reverence and love displayed by the family and tribe. When the ceremony concluded, Standing Bear made an announcement that surprised everyone present, including his own people. "Captain Morrison," he said formally, "you and your men have shown my people great kindness and respect. In return, I want to offer you something that no white soldiers have ever received: the protection and friendship of our tribe." He gestured toward a young warrior who came forward carrying a beautifully crafted peace pipe. "This pipe belonged to my father and his father before him. I offer it to you as a symbol of the alliance between us. As long as you carry this, no member of our tribe will raise a weapon against you or your men." Morrison accepted the pipe with hands that trembled slightly, understanding the magnitude of the gift he was receiving. "Chief Standing Bear, I'm honored by your trust. I give you my word that I will do everything in my power to protect your people and work toward peace between our cultures." The exchange of gifts continued as other tribal members offered small tokens of friendship to the soldiers, while some of Morrison's men shared their own personal items as signs of respect and goodwill. Sergeant O'Brien received a small carved buffalo from Windwalker, along with an invitation to bring his family to visit the reservation when tensions allowed. Dr. Hayes was given a collection of medicinal herbs and instructions for their use from the tribe's medicine woman. But perhaps the most significant moment came when Little Fox approached Morrison. With a small leather pouch. "This is for you," the boy said shyly. "Grandfather helped me make it. Inside are stones from our sacred places, so you will always remember." U.S. Morrison knelt down to Little Fox's level and accepted the gift. "I could never forget you. Little Fox, you taught me something very important about courage and kindness." As the combined group prepared to leave the burial ground, Morrison realized that they were no longer two separate forces temporarily cooperating. They had become something unprecedented, a genuine alliance based on mutual respect and understanding. The return journey would bring new challenges as Morrison had to explain his actions to his superiors, but he no longer cared about the potential consequences to his career. He had discovered something more valuable than military advancement. He had found a way to serve his country that aligned with his conscience and his humanity. The standoff that had begun with two groups of armed men facing each other across a hostile divide had evolved into a partnership that would challenge the prevailing assumptions about the inevitable conflict between white settlers and Native American tribes. Morrison carried the peace pipe and Singing Dove's military button as tangible reminders that understanding and compassion could triumph over fear and prejudice. When good people on both sides were willing to see past their differences to their shared humanity. The return to Fort Robinson was a journey of anticipation and dread for Captain Morrison. Word of his unauthorized alliance with Chief Standing Bear's band had preceded them, carried by military couriers who had observed the unusual procession. From a distance, as they approached the fort, Morrison could see the flags flying at full staff and the orderly formations of soldiers conducting their daily drills, reminders of the military precision and obedience to orders that he had chosen to set aside. Join us for the incredible conclusion of this story that proves courage comes in many forms. Subscribe to our channel for more amazing tales of bravery and honor from the Old West. Colonel William Thornton, the commanding officer of Fort Robinson, was waiting in his office when Morrison reported for duty. Thornton was a career military man of the old school, gray-haired and stern, with a reputation for strict discipline and unwavering adherence to regulations. "Captain Morrison," Colonel Thornton began without preamble, "would you care to explain why you chose to escort a band of unauthorized Indians to conduct illegal ceremonies instead of arresting them?" As ordered, Morrison stood at attention, but his voice was calm and steady. "Sir, I encountered a family group traveling to bury their dead according to their religious traditions. The situation required a humanitarian response rather than a military one." "A humanitarian response?" Thornton's voice rose slightly. "Captain, you are a soldier in the United States Army, not a missionary. Your job is to follow orders, not to make policy decisions based on your personal feelings. With respect, sir, my orders were to handle the situation as I saw fit. I used my judgment to avoid unnecessary bloodshed while still accomplishing the mission objective of ensuring the tribe returned to the reservation." Colonel Thornton studied Morrison for a long moment, then gestured to a chair. "Sit down. Captain, this conversation is going to take a while." Over the next hour, Morrison recounted the events of the past week in detail, describing not just the tactical decisions he had made, but the human interactions that had influenced those decisions. He spoke of Little Fox's offer of water, of Singing Dove's dying wish, and of the mutual respect that had developed between his soldiers and the Lakota families. "Captain," Colonel Thornton said when Morrison finished his account, "what you've described is commendable from a human perspective, but it sets a dangerous precedent. If every officer in the field decides to ignore orders based on their personal interpretation of circumstances, we'll have chaos instead of military discipline. Sir, I understand your concern, but I believe there are times when rigid adherence to orders can cause more harm than good. The Lakota people I encountered were not enemy combatants. They were families trying to honor their dead with dignity." Colonel Thornton opened a folder on his desk and withdrew several documents. "Captain, I've received reports from 3 different sources about your actions. 2 of them recommend you for court-martial. The third, however, comes from an unexpected source." He handed Morrison a letter bearing official seals. "This is from the Territorial Governor's office. Apparently, Chief Standing Bear sent a delegation to meet with Governor Richards immediately after your encounter. They reported your actions and requested a formal meeting to discuss peace negotiations. Morrison felt a surge of surprise and hope. He hadn't expected Standing Bear to take such a bold political step. Governor Richards has ordered a suspension of all military actions against Standing Bear's tribe. Pending formal peace talks, Colonel Thornton continued. He's also requested that you serve as a military liaison during the negotiations. Given your apparent rapport with their leadership, sir, does this mean? It means, Captain, that your insubordination has inadvertently opened a door that higher authorities want to explore. Whether this ends with your court-martial or your promotion depends entirely on the outcome of these negotiations. The stakes have never been higher. Subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell to see how this incredible story of diplomacy and courage reaches its conclusion. The peace negotiations began 2 weeks later in the territorial capital, bringing together military officials, government representatives, tribal leaders, and Morrison himself as the unlikely architect of this unprecedented dialogue. Chief Standing Bear arrived with a delegation of tribal elders, including Windwalker and several other warriors who had been present during the original standoff. To Morrison's delight, Standing Bear had also brought Little Fox, who served as an unofficial ambassador of goodwill throughout the proceedings. The negotiations were complex and often contentious, involving disputes over land rights, reservation boundaries, hunting privileges, and the treatment of Native Americans who left designated areas for religious or family purposes. But the foundation of mutual respect that had been established during the journey to the sacred burial ground provided a framework for productive discussion. Governor Richards, a pragmatic politician who understood that peaceful coexistence was more cost-effective than ongoing military conflict, proved to be receptive to creative solutions. Morrison found himself serving not just as a military advisor, but as a translator of cultural nuances and a bridge between vastly different worldviews. Captain Morrison, Standing Bear said during one of the breaks in negotiations, "You have become something new, a white chief who understands that strength sometimes comes from choosing peace over war." The breakthrough came when Little Fox, who had been quietly drawing pictures during the adult conversations, presented his artwork to the assembled negotiators. His drawings showed soldiers and Native Americans working together, sharing meals and protecting each other's children. The simple images, created by a child who had experienced kindness from supposed enemies, reminded everyone of what was at stake. The final treaty, signed after 3 weeks of intensive negotiations, established several important precedents. It created protected corridors for religious and ceremonial travel, established joint military tribal patrols to prevent conflicts, and set up a system for resolving disputes through dialogue rather than force. Most significantly, it recognized the Lakota signatories as sovereign allies rather than conquered subjects, granting them certain self-governing rights within their traditional territories. Morrison's role in the negotiations earned him an unexpected promotion to major, along with a new assignment as the military's liaison to the Territorial Peace Commission. But the greatest reward came from the relationships he had built with his former adversaries. Chief Standing Bear presented Morrison with an eagle feather, the highest honor a Lakota warrior could receive. "This feather represents courage in the face of danger," Standing Bear explained. "You showed courage when you chose to see us as human beings rather than as enemies." Little Fox, now considered Morrison's honorary nephew by the tribe, gave him a drawing that would hang in Morrison's office for the rest of his career. It showed 2 groups of people, one in blue uniforms and one in traditional native dress, standing together under a bright sun with their hands linked in friendship. The success of the Morrison Accords, as they came to be known, led to similar peace agreements with other tribes throughout the region. Morrison's approach, combining military strength with cultural sensitivity and human compassion, became a model for frontier diplomacy. Sergeant O'Brien, who had been promoted to lieutenant, often accompanied Morrison on diplomatic missions, bringing his practical wisdom and his growing friendship with Windwalker to bear on complex negotiations. Dr. Hayes established a medical exchange program, training tribal medicine workers in Western medical techniques, while learning about traditional Native American healing practices. The collaboration led to breakthroughs in treating diseases that had devastated both communities. This incredible transformation from conflict to cooperation continues to inspire. Subscribe to our channel and share this story with others who need to hear about the power of choosing understanding over hostility. Years later, when Morrison had retired from the Army and was serving as a territorial judge, he would often reflect on that July morning when he had faced Chief Standing Bear. Across 100 yards of hostile ground, the decision to choose compassion over compliance with orders had seemed risky at the time, but it had led to a legacy of peace that benefited thousands of people. Little Fox grew up to become a leader in his own right, serving as a bridge between cultures and carrying forward the lessons of cooperation he had learned during those transformative days. He often visited Morrison, bringing his own children to meet the white grandfather who had helped show both peoples a better way forward. Chief Standing Bear lived to see his grandchildren grow up in a world where the threat of military conflict had been replaced by opportunities for mutual prosperity and cultural exchange. On his deathbed, he requested that Morrison be present, wanting to thank him one final time for the courage to see past uniform and war paint to the humanity beneath. "My friend," Standing Bear said weakly, "you taught me that sometimes the greatest warriors are those who choose when not to fight." Morrison held his old friend's hand as he passed, knowing that their unlikely alliance had proven that understanding and respect could triumph over fear and prejudice when good people on both sides were willing to take the first step toward peace. The standoff that had begun with soldiers and warriors facing each other in hostile confrontation had evolved into a lasting partnership that changed the nature of frontier relations. Morrison's willingness to risk his career for his principles had opened a door to a future where children like Little Fox could grow up seeing diversity as strength rather than difference as division. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey that proves courage, compassion, and the willingness to see beyond our differences can change the world. James Morrison's story reminds us that true leadership sometimes means having the courage to disobey unjust orders and choose humanity over protocol. If this story inspired you, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and share this tale with others who need to hear that understanding can triumph over conflict. Let us know in the comments what moment of this story moved you most. The military button that Singing Dove had given Morrison remained on his desk throughout his career, a reminder that enemies are often just friends who haven't had the chance to understand each other. Next to it, he kept Little Fox's drawing and the eagle feather from Standing Bear, symbols of the transformation that was possible when people chose courage and compassion over fear and hatred. The story of the standoff that became an alliance proved that the most important battles are sometimes won not through superior firepower, but through the strength of character, to recognize our shared humanity and the wisdom to choose peace over war when peace serves justice better than conflict. Morrison had learned that true honor came not from blind obedience to orders, but from the courage to do what was right even when it was difficult, and that sometimes the greatest victories are achieved not by defeating our enemies, but by transforming them into friends. Controls du Chat Sonnet 4.